Have you ever, in perfect silence, heard a whisper of your name? Or caught a flicker of movement in an empty room out of the corner of your eye? That isn't your imagination. It's an echo, the echo of a long-forgotten story, trying to be remembered. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles, the place where we listen to the stories that never truly died. The first thing Akari Tanaka noticed was the humidity. It was the first week of June, the very beginning of Tsuyu, the rainy season, and Tokyo had draped itself in a thick, wet blanket. The air in her small apartment in Setagaya felt heavy, clinging to her skin the moment she stepped out of the shower. She toweled off quickly, the rhythmic squeak of the towel against her skin a familiar morning sound. Her apartment was a typical one-room mansion, a slightly generous term for a single room that served as her bedroom, living room, and dining area, with a tiny kitchenette alcove and a compact bathroom unit. It was on the third floor of a tired-looking concrete building, its only luxury a small balcony that overlooked a narrow street lined with vending machines and meticulously parked bicycles. She pulled on her uniform for the cafe, a plain black t-shirt, black trousers, and a cream-colored apron she would put on when she arrived. Her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser was pale, her dark, shoulder-length hair still damp and clinging to her neck. There were faint shadows under her eyes that her concealer couldn't quite hide. Sleep hadn't been coming easily lately. She chalked it up to the weather, the oppressive weight of the air that seemed to press down even in her dreams. Her commute was a finely tuned routine. A 7-minute walk to Sangenjaya Station, a brisk journey through the ticket gates with a practice tap of her Suica card, and then down to the Dennen Toshi line platform. The train was always packed, a silent, orderly crush of bodies. Akari had mastered the art of carving out a small pocket of personal space, just enough to hold her phone and read the news or scroll through her friends' innocuous updates. She'd press herself into a corner near the doors, the cool glass a slight relief against her arm. It was on a Tuesday that the routine first developed a flaw, a tiny crack in its predictable surface. As she stood on the platform, waiting for the 8:14 semi-express to Shibuya, she noticed a man. There was nothing remarkable about him. He was of average height, wearing a simple, dark gray suit that was slightly rumpled, the kind worn by a million other salarymen across the city. His hair was black and neatly parted. He held a plain black briefcase. He was standing a few feet away, staring not at his phone, not at the train schedule display, but down the tracks, as if willing the train to appear. Kari thought nothing of it. He was just another face in the sea of commuters. The next day, Wednesday, she saw him again. Same spot on the platform. Same rumpled gray suit, same briefcase. This time, as the train screeched to a halt, his eyes flickered in her direction for just a second. It wasn't a look of recognition or even interest. It was completely blank, a momentary, passive observation, like noticing a pigeon on the ground. But it was direct. The doors hissed open, the crowd surged, and she lost him in the shuffle. A faint unease, as light and fleeting as a moth's wing, brushed against her. On Thursday, he was there again. The unease returned, a little stronger this time. She found herself deliberately looking for him as she descended the stairs to the platform. And there he was, same place, same suit. It was the suit that was starting to bother her. Didn't he own any other clothes? Perhaps he had several identical ones. Or perhaps he had it dry cleaned every night. It was a stupid, trivial detail, but her mind latched onto it. To test a theory, she shifted her position, moving further down the platform toward the front of the train. She waited, her back to him, pretending to be engrossed in a message on her phone. She could feel a prickling sensation on her neck, the feeling of being watched. When she risked a glance over her shoulder, his head was turned slightly, his gaze fixed on the spot where she had been standing just moments before. When he realized she was looking, his eyes snapped back to the empty tracks. Coincidence, she told herself firmly. Sangenjaya was a major transit hub. Thousands of people used this station every day. It was perfectly logical that someone else would have the exact same commute. She was just tired, her mind playing tricks on her. She got on the train and forced the thought from her mind. focusing instead on the day ahead. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of ceramic on saucers, the polite murmur of customers. The cafe, Kissa Kamaribi, was a small, cozy place tucked away on a side street in Daikanyama. It specialized in siphon coffee and thick, fluffy slices of toast. Her boss, Mrs. Sato, was a kind, round-faced woman in her late 50s who treated Akari more like a daughter than an employee. Her only other coworker was Yuna, a university student with brightly dyed hair and an inexhaustible supply of cheerful gossip. "You look tired, Akari-chan," Yuna said that afternoon as they wiped down tables during a lull. "Big night." Akari forced a small smile. "No, just the humidity. It makes it hard to sleep." "Tell me about it," Yuna groaned, fanning herself with a menu. "My hair is a disaster. Anyway, you'll never guess who I saw yesterday. Kenji from the bakery down the street. He was on a date, and she was like, way too fashionable for him." Akari listened with half an ear, her mind drifting back to the man on the platform. The blankness of his eyes. It was foolish to be unnerved. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't said anything. He had just been there. She felt a flush of embarrassment for her own paranoia. She was a grown woman living in one of the safest cities in the world. She needed to get a grip. On Friday, she decided to take a different train. She left her apartment 10 minutes later than usual, aiming for the 8:24 local. It would add another 15 minutes to her commute, but she told herself the trade-off for a slightly less crowded train was worth it. As she walked to the station, the air was thick with the smell of petrichor from an overnight rain, the streets gleaming under a pale, overcast sky. She bought a bottle of cold green tea from a vending machine, the condensation instantly slick on her hand. She deliberately chose a different entrance to the station and made her way to a completely different part of the platform. The local train was indeed less crowded. She found a seat, a rare luxury, and settled in with a sense of relief. She had broken the pattern. She had taken control. The feeling was empowering. The train pulled out of the station, and she watched the familiar landscape of Setagaya slide by. As the train curved toward the next station, she glanced out the window at the platform they were leaving behind. For a fleeting second, through the gap between two concrete pillars, she saw him. He was standing on the platform for the express train, in his usual spot, looking not at the tracks, but across them directly at her departing train. A cold dread, sharp and unpleasant, pierced through the humidity. It wasn't a coincidence. That evening, the walk home from the station felt different. The familiar 7-minute journey down the well-lit streets seemed longer, the shadows in the alleyways darker. Every passerby seemed to warrant a second glance. Was that him? Was that his silhouette? The jingle of a bicycle bell behind her made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled with her keys at her apartment building's main entrance, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. Inside her apartment, with the door triple locked and the security chain engaged, she leaned against the cool metal, her breath coming in ragged gasps. This was insane. She was letting her imagination run away with her. He hadn't followed her home. She hadn't seen him since the morning. But the image of his face, looking across the tracks, was burned into her mind. She made a simple dinner of instant ramen and a boiled egg, eating it while standing in her kitchen alcove. She didn't turn on the television or any music. The silence of the small room felt oppressive, amplifying every creak of the old building, every distant siren. She found herself listening, straining to hear any unfamiliar sound from the hallway outside her door. The scrape of a neighbor's key, the thud of a closing door, the soft whir of the elevator. Each one was a potential threat. The weekend offered a brief respite. She met a friend for lunch in Shinjuku, losing herself in the noise and the overwhelming crowds of the massive station and surrounding department stores. For a few hours, she felt anonymous and safe again. She didn't tell her friend about the man. How could she? There's a man who takes the same train as me, and it's starting to scare me. It sounded pathetic, delusional. She could already imagine her friend's well-meaning but dismissive response. But on Monday morning, the dread returned the moment she woke up. She considered calling in sick, but she couldn't afford to lose a day's wages. She needed to be rational. She would go to the station, get on her train, and ignore him. She would not look for him. He was there. She couldn't help but see him. He stood in the same spot, a fixed point in the flowing river of people. This time, she didn't look away. She stared back, trying to memorize his face. It was strangely difficult. His features were so plain, so utterly unremarkable, that they seemed to slide from her memory the moment she looked away. No scars, no moles, no distinguishing marks. Just a pale, expressionless face. He met her gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something registered in his eyes. It wasn't malice or anger. It was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement. And then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The train arrived, and Akari pushed her way on, her body trembling. The nod had changed everything. It was a confirmation. Asterisk, I see you. I know you see me. Asterisk, it was a message sent across the crowded platform, silent and terrifying. The following days blurred into a haze of low-grade fear. He was always there. The silent nod became a daily ritual. Kari tried everything. She tried leaving earlier, later. She tried taking the bus, a slow, rattling journey that made her late for work twice. One day, she even took a completely different train line that required 2 transfers, adding nearly an hour to her commute. She felt a brief, hollow victory when she didn't see him at Sanganjaya. But when she got off at Daikanyama and started her walk to the cafe, she saw him. He was standing on the opposite side of the street, partially obscured by a telephone pole, just watching. He didn't move or gesture. He just stood there. Her world had begun to shrink. The walk from the station to the cafe, once a pleasant stroll past stylish boutiques and bakeries, was now a gauntlet of fear. She kept her head down, walking as quickly as she could, her keys clutched in her fist inside her coat pocket. At work, her hands shook so much that Mrs. Sato commented on it. Akari-chan, are you feeling all right? Your hands are trembling. I'm fine, Sato-san, she lied, hiding her hands behind her back. I think I just had too much coffee this morning. That night, she found the flower. It was placed directly in front of her apartment door, centered perfectly on her doormat. It was a single, beautiful white camellia, its petals flawless and waxy. There was no note, no wrapping, just the flower, lying on the worn gray mat. In the sterile fluorescent light of the apartment hallway, it looked both beautiful and deeply sinister. Akari knew what white camellias could mean. Waiting. She also knew of the older, more morbid association with samurai. A camellia flower drops its head all at once, rather than petal by petal, reminiscent of a beheading. Sudden death. She stared at it, her blood running cold. This was no longer just about seeing a man on a train platform. He had been here. He knew which apartment was hers. He had stood right outside her door, in this quiet, empty hallway. He had left this for her. This silent, ominous message. She didn't touch it. She backed away slowly, as if it were a venomous snake. She unlocked her door, slipped inside, and slammed it shut, ramming the deadbolt home and fumbling with the security chain. She peered through the peephole, her heart pounding. The hallway was empty. The white flower sat on her doormat, a stark, pale accusation in the distorted fisheye view. She stayed there for nearly an hour watching, until a neighbor from down the hall came home and, after a moment's hesitation, picked up the flower and carried it into their own apartment, assuming it was a gift for them. Akari sagged against the door in a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that it was gone, and a new, more profound terror that the message had been delivered nonetheless. The next day, she went to the police. She found the local Koban, the small police box near the station, and spoke to the officer on duty. He was an older man with a kind, weathered face. He listened patiently as she explained, her voice trembling, about the man on the platform, the constant presence, the flower. He nodded sympathetically. I understand this is very distressing for you, Tanaka-san. He pulled out a form. What is his name? I don't know, Akari admitted, feeling a fresh wave of hopelessness. Do you have a photograph of him? No, I'm scared to take one. Has he spoken to you? Threatened you in any way? The officer asked, his pen hovering over the paper. No, he just watches me. And he left a flower. The officer's expression didn't change, but Akari could sense a subtle shift in his posture. The professional concern was being replaced by a gentle dismissal. A flower? Tanaka-san, thousands of people have the same commute. It's not a crime to stand on a train platform, and leaving a flower, while perhaps unusual, is not a threat. We can't file a report unless there is a clear danger or a concrete action. Has he tried to contact you online? Has he damaged your property? Has he touched you? No, but I would suggest you try to vary your routine more, he said, pushing the blank form aside. And be sure to keep your door locked. If he does anything more, anything at all, you come back to us immediately. We can make a note of your concern, but there is no official action we can take at this time. She left the police box feeling more alone than ever. The system she had believed would protect her had just told her she was on her own. His actions were so carefully calibrated, so perfectly towing the line of legality, that he was effectively a ghost. A ghost who was methodically and patiently destroying her peace of mind. Her paranoia began to curdle into a constant, gnawing anxiety. At home, she started covering the lens of her laptop's webcam with a piece of tape. She'd jump at the sound of the phone ringing. Twice, when she answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. No breathing, no static, just a dead, empty void. When she checked the caller ID, it showed unknown number. Was it him, or was it just a random misdial? She couldn't be sure, and the not knowing was a special kind of torture. She started to hear things. A faint scratching sound at her door late at night, so soft she thought she might be imagining it, like the sound of a stray cat's claws. But she was on the 3rd floor. Then there was the whisper. Sometimes, when the apartment was completely silent, she would hear what sounded like a single, sibilant exhalation from the corner of the room, near the closet. A soft, drawn-out ch-ch-ch. The first time it happened, she froze, every muscle in her body tensing. She stared at the closet door for a full minute before forcing herself to get up, her legs shaking, and fling it open. There was nothing inside but her neatly hung clothes and a box of winter sweaters. She was losing her mind. The lack of sleep, the constant fear. It had to be auditory hallucinations brought on by stress. That was the only rational explanation. But another, colder part of her brain whispered that the sounds were real, that he was closer than she could ever imagine. A week later, a package arrived. It was a small, square box wrapped in plain brown paper, addressed to her in neat, printed characters. Her address was perfect. The return address section was blank. It had been left with the building's custodian, who handed it to her with a polite bow when she came home from work. She carried it upstairs as if it were a bomb. Inside her locked apartment, she stared at it, her mind racing. Could be from a friend, a family member. But she wasn't expecting anything. With trembling fingers, she tore the paper away. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a wind chime. It was a beautiful, delicate thing made of cast iron, in the shape of a dragonfly. Its sound, when she hesitantly lifted it, was clear and pure. A few weeks ago, she had been talking to Yuna at the cafe about how she missed the sound of the furin, the wind chimes her grandmother always hung up in the summer at their family home in Nagano. She had mentioned offhandedly how she wished she could have one, but her balcony was too small and probably against the building's rules. She had said it only once, in a quiet conversation in the middle of a workday. There was no one else in the cafe at the time except for an elderly couple who were hard of hearing. How could he know? The question hammered at her, drowning out all other thoughts. How could he possibly know that? Had he been in the cafe? She replayed the day in her mind, trying to picture the customers. She couldn't remember anyone suspicious. The implications were dizzying. Was her phone bugged? Was he listening to her conversations somehow? Or had he been there, sitting in a corner, unseen, unheard, just absorbing the details of her life? She dropped the wind chime back in the box as if it were burning her. The beautiful object now seemed grotesque, a symbol of his complete and utter invasion into her life. He wasn't just watching her anymore. He was listening. He was learning. He was slowly, patiently, drawing a net around her, and she had no idea how to escape. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat on her bed, her back against the wall, staring at her apartment door until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the edges of her curtains. The city outside began to wake up, the familiar sounds of traffic and life starting their daily rhythm. For everyone else, it was just another day. For Akari, it felt like the walls of her own life were closing in. The box and its contents sat on her low table, a poisonous presence in the small room. Akari couldn't bring herself to touch it again. She couldn't throw it in her own garbage. The thought of it being so close, even in a bin bag, was intolerable. She had to get it out, far away. She waited until after midnight. The city's relentless hum had softened to a low thrum. She put the wind chime back in its box, taped it shut with ferocious precision, and then placed the whole thing in a plain paper bag from a convenience store. She put on a dark hoodie, pulling the hood up to obscure her face, and slipped out of her apartment. The streets of Setagaya were quiet now, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. Every shadow seemed to move. The rustle of leaves in a small park sounded like footsteps. She walked quickly, her destination the Tama River, a 20-minute walk away. It felt like the only place definitive enough, a flowing, cleansing force that could carry this tainted object away from her. She reached the high concrete banks of the river. Below, the water was a dark, featureless ribbon under the moonless sky. Across the river, the lights of Kanagawa Prefecture twinkled. She looked around. There was no one, just the distant rumble of a truck on a nearby highway. She took the box out of the bag, her hands clammy. For a moment, she hesitated. What if this was a mistake? What if throwing it away angered him? What was the protocol for dealing with a monster who followed all the rules of normal life? The thought propelled her. With a choked sob, she swung her arm back and threw the box as hard as she could out into the darkness. It made a surprisingly small splash, a brief gulp from the river that was swallowed instantly by the silence. It was gone. She stood for a long time, staring at the spot where it had vanished, her shoulders shaking. Getting rid of the object didn't make her feel safer. It just felt like she had thrown away a piece of evidence that no one would have believed existed anyway. The walk back was worse. The emptiness of the streets now felt menacing. She imagined him in every darkened doorway, behind every parked car. When she finally made it back to her building and locked her door, she didn't feel relief, only the bone-deep exhaustion of a soldier returning from a patrol. The next day at the cafe was a new form of torment. Her sanctuary was gone. Every male customer who walked in alone sent a jolt of panic through her. She would scrutinize their faces, their suits, their briefcases. Was it him? Had he changed his appearance? Could he be sitting there right now, sipping a coffee and watching her? The hiss of the steam wand made her jump. The clatter of a dropped spoon sounded like a gunshot. Akari-chan, the order for table 4, Yuna said gently, nudging her. Akari blinked, realizing she had been standing frozen, staring at a man in a business suit reading a newspaper. Oh, sorry. Are you sure you're okay? Yuna asked later, her voice lowered. You seem really jumpy today. More than usual. Kari wanted to tell her. The words were right there, lodged in her throat. Asterisk, I'm being stalked. He knows things about me. I'm terrified. Asterisk, but the memory of the police officer's polite dismissal held her back. Yuna was her friend, but she was also pragmatic and cheerful. She would likely tell Akari to be careful, to report it again, maybe even suggest she was overreacting. The thought of having her fear minimized by a friend was more than she could bear. I'm just really tired, she said, forcing a weak smile. I think I'm going to go to my parents' place in Nagano this weekend. Get out of the city. It was a lie, an idea that had just sprung into her head. But as soon as she said it, it felt like the only solution. That's a great idea, Yuna said, her face brightening. The mountain air will do you good. Get away from all this gross humidity. The idea took root. Nagano, home. The thought of her family's house. A sturdy, traditional home with a well-tended garden felt like a fairy tale. Safety. She could breathe there. That evening, she called her mother. Akari? Is everything all right? You don't usually call on a weekday. Her mother's voice was warm, familiar, a sound from a life that felt a million miles away. Everything's fine, Mom, Akari said, trying to keep her voice light. I was just thinking I'd like to come home this weekend, if that's okay. Okay? Of course it's okay. Your father will be so happy. Are you sure everything is all right? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just work. Tokyo is a lot sometimes. It's a big city, her mother agreed. Too many people. Well, you come home and I'll make you a proper meal. You're probably just eating ramen from the convenience store. Kari closed her eyes. Her mother's concern was a bomb, but it also highlighted the vast gulf between her reality and their perception of it. How could she ever explain the intricate, suffocating fear that was strangling her? It was too strange, too fragile. It would shatter into nonsense under the weight of a normal conversation. She booked a bus ticket for Friday evening, a late one leaving from the Shinjuku Expressway bus terminal. The thought of the weekend in Nagano became a tiny, flickering light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. She just had to make it through the next 2 days. On Thursday, she varied her route again, taking a convoluted series of trains that got her to work almost 30 minutes late. Mrs. Sato gave her a worried look but said nothing. Kari didn't see him. The small victory felt hollow. He was no longer confined to her commute. He could be anywhere. The whole city was his hunting ground. When she got home that evening, the first thing she noticed was the smell. A faint, cloying sweetness in the air of her apartment. It wasn't unpleasant, like rotting food. It was floral, like jasmine or gardenia, but it was strong. Too strong for such a small space. She checked her garbage, the sink, the bathroom. Nothing. She hadn't bought any flowers. No air fresheners. She opened her small window to the balcony, hoping to air the room out, but the scent seemed to be coming from inside. She stood in the middle of the room, turning in a slow circle. And then she saw it. On the small bookshelf next to her bed, one of her books, a paperback novel she had finished weeks ago, was not flush with the others. It was sticking out by a centimeter. Her heart stopped. She knew with absolute certainty that she hadn't left it that way. She was meticulous about her books, lining them up perfectly. It was a small, silly habit, but it was hers. She approached the shelf as if it were rigged with an explosive. Her breath hitched. She could see something tucked inside the pages of the book, used as a bookmark. It was a pressed flower, a white gardenia, the source of the smell. He had been in her apartment. The realization hit her not with a scream, but with a terrifying, silent clarity. The lock hadn't been forced. The door had been locked when she arrived. How did he get in? Did he have a key? Had he picked the lock? The scratching she had heard. Was that him testing the door? The fear was different now. It was no longer about being watched. It was about being invaded. Her last sanctuary, the only place she could lock the world out, had been breached. He had been in here. He had walked on her floor. He had breathed her air. He had touched her things. He had left another one of his silent, terrifying messages. She backed away from the bookshelf, her eyes wide with horror, and bumped into her small dining table. A single chopstick, left over from her breakfast, rolled off and clattered to the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. She stared at the book, at the flower, and a new thought, colder and sharper than any before, cut through her panic. The whispers she'd been hearing in the corner. The feeling of a presence. She had dismissed it as stress, as exhaustion. But what if it wasn't a hallucination? What if, when she thought she was alone, she wasn't? The thought was so monstrous she couldn't fully grasp it. The idea that he could not only get in, but that he could be in here with her, hiding. In the closet, under the bed. She scrambled for her phone and her purse, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She had to get out. She couldn't spend another second in this room. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't grab a jacket. She just fled. She ran out the door, not bothering to lock it, and pounded down the 3 flights of stairs, not waiting for the elevator. She burst out into the street, gulping the humid night air, and just started walking, fast, with no destination in mind. She just had to keep moving. She ended up at a 24-hour manga cafe. She paid for a small private booth with a reclining chair and a computer. It felt safer than her apartment, but only marginally. At least here there were other people, staff, security cameras. She locked the flimsy door of her booth and huddled in the chair, pulling her knees to her chest. She didn't use the computer. She didn't try to sleep. She just sat there, in the dim, anonymous light, listening to the muffled sounds of the city and the quiet turning of pages from the other booths, and waited for Friday to come. The tiny light of Nagano had become a desperate, life-saving beacon. She had to get there. It was the only thought she could hold on to. The bus ride to Nagano was 4 hours of purgatory. Akari had chosen a seat by the window, hoping the darkness rushing past would be a comfort. But every flicker of light, every pair of headlights from a passing car, seemed to form his face in the reflection. The bus was half empty, the other passengers anonymous lumps in the dim interior lighting. A man in a business suit sat 2 rows ahead of her. She watched him for the first hour, her muscles tensed, cataloging the shape of his head, the set of his shoulders. It wasn't him, but the constant vigilance was exhausting. She finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, her head pressed against the cool glass of the window. Her dreams were a chaotic slideshow of images. A white camellia blooming from the cracks in her apartment floor, a dragonfly wind chime that chimed with the sound of a dry whisper, a book whose pages were filled with nothing but his blank, staring eyes. She woke up with a jolt as the bus pulled into a rest stop, her heart hammering. Her father was waiting for her at the Nagano bus station. He was a tall, quiet man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands from his years of tending the family's small apple orchard. The sight of him, standing under the bright station lights in his familiar worn jacket, was so overwhelmingly normal that Akari almost burst into tears. "Akari," he said, his voice a low rumble. He took her small, hastily packed bag. "You look thin." "I'm okay, Dad," she managed to say, the lie feeling heavy in her mouth. The drive home was quiet. They left the city lights behind, heading into the darker, winding roads of the countryside. The air that came through the open car window was cool and clean, smelling of earth and pine, a stark contrast to the thick, soupy air of Tokyo. Her parents' house was on the outskirts of a small town, nestled against the foot of a mountain. It was a large, old-fashioned wooden house, with sliding paper screens and a dark-tiled roof that swooped gracefully at the corners. It was the house she had grown up in, a place so deeply ingrained in her memory that she could navigate it blindfolded. Her mother was waiting up for her, a pot of miso soup simmering on the stove. She fussed over Akari, hugging her tightly. "You're cold," she said. "Come eat something. You're just skin and bones." Sitting at the low wooden table in her parents' warm, bright kitchen, eating a simple meal of rice, soup, and pickled vegetables, Akari felt a layer of tension she hadn't even been aware of begin to dissolve. The food was simple and delicious. The sounds were right. The hum of the old refrigerator, the chirping of crickets outside, her father turning the pages of a newspaper in the next room. There were no sirens, no mysterious whispers, no scratching at the door. Here the world made sense. "You should stay for the whole week," her mother said, watching her eat. "Yunichan from your work can cover for you, can't she?" "It's their busy season, Mom," Akari replied, though the thought was incredibly tempting. A whole week, 7 days of safety. She slept in her old room. The bedding smelled of sunshine and cedar from being stored in a wooden chest. The window looked out onto the garden, a dark, rustling expanse under the stars. For the first time in weeks, she slept deeply, a dreamless, heavy sleep that lasted for 10 hours. She woke to the sound of birdsong. The morning light filtering through the shoji screen was soft and gentle. For a few blissful seconds, she forgot. She was just Akari, home from the city. Then the memory of the past few weeks crashed back in, and a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. But it was distant. Tokyo was far away. He was far away. She spent the day helping her father in the orchard. The work was physical and grounding. The repetitive motion of pulling weeds and checking the young, green apples on the branches was meditative. The sun was warm on her back. She spoke little, but her father didn't press her. He seemed to understand that she needed the silence, the simple reality of the earth under her fingernails. That evening, feeling more relaxed than she had in a long time, she decided to go for a walk before dinner. A path led from the back of their property up into the foothills of the mountain. It was a walk she had taken hundreds of times as a child. The path was narrow and dappled with the golden light of the setting sun. She walked for about 15 minutes, climbing steadily, until she reached a small clearing with a stone Jizo statue, its red bib faded by the sun and rain. It was a familiar, comforting landmark. She sat on a rock near the statue, looking down at the valley below. She could see the tiled roof of her parents' house, smoke curling from the chimney. It was peaceful. She felt safe. That's when she saw it. At the edge of the clearing, partially tucked behind the trunk of a large cedar tree, was a small, man-made object. It was a little cairn, a stack of 3 flat, gray stones, one on top of the other. It was the kind of thing a hiker might make. It shouldn't have been alarming, but it was new. It hadn't been there 2 days ago, the last time her father had walked this path. He had mentioned it at breakfast, commenting on how the path was getting overgrown. Akari stared at the stones. It was just a pile of rocks. Coincidence? A hiker? It had to be. But an icy finger of dread traced its way down her spine. The perfect, deliberate placement. The way it was just visible from the path. A small, unnatural arrangement in the wilderness. Felt like a sign. Felt like a message. Asterisk, I am here. I know where you are. Asterisk. The thought was so ludicrous, so impossible, that she tried to laugh it off. It was a dry, choked sound. He couldn't be here. He couldn't have followed her 200 kilometers from Tokyo to this specific, remote patch of mountain. How? She had taken a public bus. She hadn't told anyone but her parents and Yuna her specific plans. It was impossible. She stood up, her legs feeling weak. The peaceful woods suddenly felt menacing. The rustling leaves sounded like whispers. The long shadows of the trees felt like they were hiding something. She backed away from the pile of stones, her eyes fixed on it. And then she turned and hurried back down the path, half jogging, stumbling over roots. When she burst back into the house, her mother looked up, concerned. Akari? What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Nothing, she gasped, trying to catch her breath. Just a snake on the path. Startled me. The lie came easily now. She was building a fortress of lies to hide her terror, but it was a flimsy defense. During dinner, she couldn't shake the image of the stones. Every sound from outside, the wind in the trees, the cry of a distant animal, made her flinch. She kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a pale, featureless face looking in. Did you call the police in Tokyo? Her father asked suddenly, his chopsticks pausing over his rice bowl. Kari froze. What? Your mother told me you were having some trouble. A man bothering you. His gaze was steady, serious. Her mother looked at her apologetically. I was worried, Akari. I just mentioned you seemed stressed about someone from your commute. The careful, sanitized version of her story. Kari's throat felt tight. I went to the police box near my station. They said there was nothing they could do. He hasn't technically done anything illegal. Her father's jaw tightened. He put down his chopsticks. This is not right. A man shouldn't be able to frighten a woman like this. When you go back, I will come with you. I will talk to this man myself. No! The word flew out of her mouth, sharper than she intended. No, Dad, please. That will only make it worse. Please, don't. The thought of her kind, gentle father confronting this thing filled her with a new kind of terror. She couldn't predict how the man would react. The confrontation could escalate things in ways she couldn't even imagine. Her father looked at her, his brow furrowed with worry and frustration. Then what will you do? You cannot live like this. I know, she whispered. I needed to get away for a weekend. I'll be more careful when I go back. Later that night, unable to sleep, she crept out of her room and went to her father's study. On his desk was a pair of high-powered binoculars he used for birdwatching. She took them, her hands trembling slightly, and went back to her room. She extinguished the light, plunging the room into darkness, and went to the window. She raised the binoculars to her eyes, focusing them on the dark shape of the mountain. The optics were good, gathering the faint starlight and painting the landscape in shades of gray and black. She scanned the treeline, the edge of the forest where the path began. Nothing, just trees swaying in the night breeze. She was being foolish, paranoid. Her fear had followed her from Tokyo and was now projecting itself onto piles of rocks and rustling leaves. She was about to lower the binoculars when she saw a flicker of light. It was tiny, pinprick, high up on the mountain, much higher than the clearing with the Jizo statue. It was there for a second, then gone. She held her breath, keeping the binoculars trained on the spot. A minute passed. 2. Nothing. Maybe it was a firefly, or the reflection from a passing airplane. Then it blinked again. A single, sharp flash of light. Paused. Another flash. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was a signal, like someone using a small flashlight. Her blood turned to ice. It was coming from the direction of the old mountain shrine, a place that was mostly abandoned and difficult to get to, especially at night. He was up there. He had followed her. The impossible was real. He was up there on the mountain, in the dark, watching her family's house. And he knew she was watching him back. The flash of light felt like a direct communication. It felt like another one of his silent, terrifying nods, delivered across miles of darkness. She stumbled back from the window, dropping the binoculars on the tatami mat with a soft thud. She crawled into her futon, pulling the covers over her head, but there was no escaping the truth. Her home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a fishbowl, and he was standing outside, looking in. The safety she had felt was an illusion. She had led him here. She had brought the monster home. Sleep was impossible. Akari lay in the suffocating darkness under her covers, her mind a frantic storm. The image of the blinking light was burned onto the back of her eyelids. He was on the mountain. How had he found her? The question was a maddening, unanswerable loop. Had he attached a GPS tracker to her bag? Her coat? Had he hacked her phone? The technological possibilities were terrifying, but the alternative was somehow worse. That he had simply followed her. That he had been on the same bus, hidden in plain sight, a shadow among the other passengers. That he had gotten off at Nagano Station and tracked her to her family's home with a relentless, predatory patience. She thought about waking her parents, about telling them everything, the flower, the wind chime, the book, the light on the mountain. But what would they do? Her father would want to call the local police. And what would Akari tell them? I saw a light on the mountain. They would treat her with the same gentle dismissal as the officer in Tokyo. They would think she was a hysterical city girl, spooked by the countryside darkness. Her father, in his quiet fury, might even try to go up the mountain himself. The thought of him, alone in the dark, searching for this man, was petrifying. She couldn't put her family in danger. She had led him here. It was her responsibility to protect them from him. The next morning, Sunday, was her last day. The pristine beauty of the Nagano countryside now seemed like a cruel joke. The clean air felt thin. The bright sun felt accusatory. At breakfast, she was quiet, pushing food around her plate. "You're leaving tonight?" her mother asked, her voice laced with concern. "You still look so tired. Stay another day." "I can't, Mom. I have work." The thought of returning to Tokyo, to her defiled apartment, was sickening. But staying here, knowing he was watching from the mountain, was an agony of a different kind. At least in Tokyo, the danger was focused on her alone. Here, her family was in the line of fire. Her father watched her, his expression grim. "I don't like this, Akari. I'll be okay." She lied, her voice hollow. She had to know for sure. The doubt, the tiny, lingering hope that she was wrong, was as torturous as the certainty. After breakfast, she announced she was going for another walk. "Don't go too far," her mother said, "and be careful of snakes." "I will." She took a different path this time, one that circled the base of the mountain instead of climbing it. It led through a dense grove of bamboo, the tall, green stalks clacking together in the wind like 1,000 wooden chimes. The sound was unnerving. She walked for nearly an hour, her senses on high alert. She saw nothing, no one, but the feeling of being watched was a physical weight on her shoulders. On her way back, she passed by the small shed where her father kept his gardening tools and the old rusty tiller. The door was slightly ajar. On the packed dirt just in front of the threshold, there was a footprint. It wasn't her father's boot print, which was wide and had a distinctive tread. It wasn't her own or her mother's. This print was from a narrow shoe, a city shoe, the kind a salaryman might wear. The kind of shoe that would be utterly impractical for walking in the muddy fields or on mountain paths. The soil was damp from the morning dew, and the impression was sharp and clear. He had been here, close. He had walked right up to the shed. He had stood yards from their house while they slept. Akari stared at the footprint, her breath catching in her throat. The pile of stones on the mountain path could have been a coincidence. The light could have been a reflection. But this footprint here was undeniable proof. It was a violation, a quiet, arrogant declaration that he could get as close as he wanted, whenever he wanted. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm. She didn't go back to the house immediately. Instead, she circled around, her mind racing. What was his goal? The terror he inflicted was so passive, so patient. It wasn't about a direct confrontation. It was about psychological erosion. He was dismantling her life, piece by piece, isolating her, making her doubt her own sanity. When she finally returned to the house, she went straight to her room and began to pack. She had to leave. She had to draw him away from her family. Her bus wasn't until 7 in the evening, but she couldn't stand being in the house any longer. She told her parents she wanted to meet a friend in Nagano City for lunch before she left. It was another lie, but it gave her an excuse to leave early. Her father insisted on driving her to the station. The silence in the car was heavy. As they pulled away from the house, Akari couldn't stop herself from looking up at the mountain. It looked serene and beautiful in the midday sun, giving away no secrets. "If he bothers you again," her father said, his eyes fixed on the road, "you call me. I will be on the next train." "I will, Dad." The promise felt like a betrayal. At the bus terminal, she hugged him goodbye, clinging to him for a second longer than usual. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Akari. Be safe." She watched him drive away until his car was just a speck. She was alone again. Her bus wasn't for hours. She couldn't stay in the terminal, a wide-open space with too many entrances and exits. She went to a nearby department store, a place of bright lights and anonymous crowds. She wandered aimlessly through the floors, from women's fashion to housewares to the food hall in the basement. The crowds made her feel both anonymous and exposed. He could be anyone. The man looking at ties, the man sampling pickles. She bought a bento box and a bottle of tea from the food hall and found a seat on a bench on the building's rooftop garden. It was a small, manicured space with a few families and couples enjoying the afternoon. Felt exposed, but at least she could see everyone around her. She ate mechanically, the food tasteless. She scanned the faces of every man who walked past. Was it him? Had he followed her here? As she was finishing her tea, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, the same one from before. Her hand trembled as she answered, pressing the phone to her ear. She didn't say anything. For a few seconds, there was only the dead, empty silence she remembered. Then, she heard a sound. It was a faint, metallic clinking. A clear, pure tone, repeated twice. Ting, ting. It was the sound of the dragonfly wind chime, the one she had thrown into the Tama River. A wave of nausea washed over her. She almost dropped the phone. It was impossible. The chime was at the bottom of a river in Tokyo. How could he have the sound? Had he recorded it before he sent it? Or was it something else? A new chime, identical to the first? Then, another sound came through the phone. A familiar, rhythmic clacking. The sound of bamboo stalks knocking together in the wind. The sound from the grove behind her parents' house. He was recording this. He was playing it for her. He was telling her, "I have the chime. I was in the bamboo grove." It was a collage of her terror, broadcast directly into her ear. She hung up, her finger jabbing at the screen. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and threw her trash away with a shaking hand. She had to get out of there. The rooftop no longer felt safe. Nowhere felt safe. She went back inside the department store and found a ladies' restroom. She locked herself in a stall and slid to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to control the ragged, panicked breaths that tore through her. He was toying with her. This wasn't just stalking anymore. It was a sophisticated, cruel game, and he was making all the rules. He was demonstrating his reach, his power. He could be anywhere, and he could bring any part of her nightmare to her at any time. She stayed in the restroom for over an hour, just listening to the mundane sounds of other women coming and going, washing their hands, chatting. The sheer normality of it was both comforting and alienating. She was living in a different reality, one that ran parallel to theirs, invisible and terrifying. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red-rimmed and her face was pale. She had to go back to Tokyo. It was the only move she had left to make. It wasn't a retreat to safety, but a strategic repositioning. She had to get back to the heart of the battle, back to her own territory, however compromised it was. Maybe there she could find a way to fight back. Maybe there she could set a trap of her own. The thought was a tiny, desperate spark in the overwhelming darkness. She left the department store and walked slowly toward the bus terminal, feeling like a soldier heading back to a battle she knew she was losing. The return journey to Tokyo was a descent into a muted, internal hell. Akari sat rigid in her seat, the city lights growing brighter and more oppressive as the bus ate up the kilometers. Every shadow in the bus, every reflection on the window, was him. The recorded sounds from the phone call echoed in her mind. The chime, the bamboo. It was a language of pure terror, and she was the only one who could understand it. Arriving at the Shinjuku terminal was a sensory assault. The sheer volume of people, the cacophony of announcements, advertisements, and footsteps felt overwhelming. In Nagano, she had been a conspicuous target in a quiet landscape. Here, she was anonymous, but so was he. He could be standing 5 feet away from her in the throng, and she would never know. The fear was different, less personal, more diffuse, but just as potent. She didn't go back to her apartment. The thought of entering that space, knowing he had been inside it, was impossible to face. The gardenia, the whisper, the footprint, her home was no longer a home. It was a stage for his torment. Instead, she took the train to a different part of the city, one she had no connection to. She found an inexpensive business hotel near Kanda Station, a district of office buildings and small, old-school restaurants. It was anonymous, functional, and blessedly impersonal. She paid in cash for one night, using a name she made up on the spot, Sato Yumi. The lie felt flimsy, a paper-thin shield against a phantom. The hotel room was tiny, Spartan, and clean. It smelled of disinfectant and old cigarette smoke. There was a bed, a small desk, a television, and a window that looked out onto the solid brick wall of the adjacent building. It was a sterile, featureless box, and for that, Akari was grateful. There were no personal belongings for him to touch, no memories for him to corrupt. She locked the door, bolted the chain, and wedged the room's small chair under the handle. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all she had. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed for hours, staring at the wall, her mind a blank slate of exhaustion and fear. She had run away from her home, from her family, and now she was hiding in a strange room under a fake name. He had successfully severed her from every anchor in her life. She was adrift. The next morning, she had to make a decision. She couldn't hide in hotels forever. She needed her things. She needed to go back to her apartment. The thought made her feel physically ill. She called the cafe. Yuna answered, her voice bright and cheerful. Akari-chan, how was Nagano? Did you get lots of fresh air? It was good, Akari said, her voice a monotone. Listen, Yuna, I'm not feeling well. I think I caught a cold. I don't think I can come in today. Oh no, that's terrible. Don't worry about it. I'll tell Sato-san. You just rest. Do you need me to bring you anything? Some okeu or Pokari sweat? The genuine kindness in Yuna's voice made Akari's throat tighten. No, I'm okay. Thank you, Yuna. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up before she could break down. She had to do this herself. Her plan was simple and born of desperation. She would go to her apartment, pack a suitcase with as many essentials as she could fit, and leave. She would find a new place to live, a new job. She would erase the life that he had latched onto. She took a taxi to her neighborhood, asking the driver to drop her off 2 blocks away from her building. She approached it like a spy in a foreign country, walking on the opposite side of the street, using parked cars and telephone poles for cover. The building looked exactly the same as it always did, deceptively normal in the morning light. There was no sign of him. She waited for a group of residents to enter the main door and slipped in behind them, avoiding the need to use her own key. She took the stairs, not the elevator, her footsteps silent on the concrete steps. When she reached the 3rd floor, her heart was pounding so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She stood outside her door, listening. Silence. She took a deep breath, slid her key into the lock, and turned it. The click sounded thunderous. She pushed the door open a few centimeters and peered inside. The apartment looked exactly as she had left it in her panicked flight. The chopstick was still on the floor. The book was still sticking out of the bookshelf. The faint, sweet smell of gardenia still hung in the air. She slipped inside, closing the door softly but not locking it, wanting to ensure she could flee again if she had to. She grabbed the largest suitcase she owned from the closet, after quickly checking that nothing and no one was inside, and began to throw things in. Clothes, toiletries, her laptop, her important documents. She moved with frantic, silent efficiency, her ears straining for any sound from the hallway. She was stuffing a handful of sweaters into the case when she noticed it. On her pillow, lying perfectly in the center of the white pillowcase, was a single, long strand of black hair. It wasn't hers. Her hair was shoulder length. This strand was much longer, fine and straight. It was the kind of thing you might not even notice, but in her hypervigilant state, it stood out like a scream. He had been back, and he had left this for her. It was such a small, intimate violation. A hair from someone else's head, placed on her pillow, the place she was supposed to rest, to be vulnerable. Was it his hair, or was it from someone else? The ambiguity was the point. It was another piece of his psychological warfare, a move designed to make her mind spin with horrifying possibilities. She felt a surge of rage, so pure and hot it momentarily burned through her fear. She was done running. She was done being the victim in his sick game. She left the strand of hair on the pillow. She finished packing her suitcase, zipped it up, and placed it by the door. Then she walked to her small kitchen alcove. She pulled out her laptop, sat at her low table, and opened it. She taped over the webcam, a habit now ingrained, and connected to her apartment's Wi-Fi. Her hands shook as she typed, but her purpose was clear. If the police couldn't help her, if her friends and family couldn't understand, she would turn to the only place she had left, the anonymous, sprawling world of the internet. She found a popular Japanese forum dedicated to true ghost stories, urban legends, and unexplained phenomena. It was a place where people shared experiences that didn't fit into the neat boxes of everyday life. She created a new, anonymous account. She chose a username, Furin no Oto, the sound of the wind chime, and then she began to write. She wrote everything. She started with the man on the platform, the gray suit, the blank eyes. She described the silent nod, the way he appeared on a different street after she changed her route. She wrote about the white camellia on her doormat. She described the terror of finding the wind chime, a gift referencing a conversation he should never have heard. She detailed the discovery of the gardenia in her book, the proof that he had been in her apartment. She described her flight to Nagano, the pile of stones, the footprint by the shed, the blinking light on the mountain. She told them about the phone call, the recorded sounds of the chime and the bamboo. She finished with the strand of long, black hair on her pillow. She didn't embellish. She didn't speculate about ghosts or demons. She laid out the facts as clearly and chronologically as she could, a desperate catalog of the methodical destruction of her peace. She titled the post, "I think I'm being stalked, but it feels like something else. Please help me." She hesitated for a long moment before clicking submit. She was casting her story into the void, exposing her deepest fears to a crowd of strangers. What if they laughed at her? What if they called her a liar, an attention seeker? What if he saw it? The thought was chilling, but she pushed it aside. What did she have to lose? He already knew everything. Maybe, just maybe, someone in the vast, faceless crowd would have an answer. Maybe someone had experienced something similar. Maybe someone would have a suggestion, a theory, anything that could give her a weapon in this fight. She clicked the button. The post went live. She closed the laptop, not wanting to watch the responses roll in just yet. She stood up, took her suitcase, and walked out of her apartment, closing the door on her old life. She didn't look back. She walked down the stairs and out into the Tokyo afternoon, a refugee in her own city, with no destination but the vague, uncertain hope that she had just sent out a flare that someone, somewhere, would see. Akari spent the next 2 nights in another anonymous business hotel, this time in Ikebukuro. She chose a room on a high floor, irrationally believing the height offered a measure of safety. Her days fell into a strange, suspended rhythm. She would leave the hotel in the morning and wander, spending hours in public libraries or the cavernous, multi-story bookstores that were her one remaining comfort. She'd sit with a book or a magazine, not really reading, just absorbing the quiet hum of a place dedicated to stories other than her own. She ate her meals in crowded ramen shops or basement food courts, always choosing a seat that faced the entrance. She never went back to Setagaya or Daikanyama. She was a ghost in her own city. She resisted the urge to check the forum post for the first day. She was terrified of what she might find, or what she might not. The silence of no replies felt almost as frightening as a barrage of ridicule. But by the second night, the suspense was unbearable. Back in her sterile hotel room, with the city's neon glow filtering through the thin curtains, she opened her laptop. She took a deep breath and navigated to the forum. Her post had 73 replies. Her heart hammered as she began to read. The first few comments were predictable. "This is terrifying. You need to go to the police again, and don't take no for an answer. Buy a security camera." Then the theories began. One user, Kitsune Mask, wrote, "This doesn't sound like a normal stalker. The level of psychological manipulation is too precise. The objects he leaves are symbolic. He's not just following you. He's creating a narrative around you. It's almost ritualistic." Another user, Tokyo Diver, added, "The lack of direct contact is key. He's trying to make you feel like you're going crazy. It's a form of gaslighting. Has anything strange happened with your electronics? Phone calls with no one there. Emails you don't remember sending." Kari's blood ran cold. The silent phone calls. She hadn't even thought to check her email. She quickly opened her mail client. In her sent folder, there was an email she didn't recognize. It had been sent 2 days ago, on the morning she fled her apartment. It was addressed to Yuna. The subject line was "Change of Plans." The body of the email was short and chillingly simple. "Hi Yuna. Something has come up. I'm taking a little more time off. We'll be in touch." He had sent an email from her account. He was actively isolating her, cutting her off from her friends, making her disappearance seem voluntary. He wasn't just observing her life. He was manipulating it. She scrolled further down the forum thread, her hands shaking. The comments grew stranger, moving from the purely rational to the fringes of the paranormal, just as her own thoughts had. Furinoodo wrote a user named Shrine Maiden 88. "The objects you mentioned, camellia, gardenia, dragonfly, they all have deep significance in Japanese culture, especially in relation to spirits and the afterlife. The white camellia can symbolize a noble death. The gardenia is sometimes used in funerals. The dragonfly is a symbol of spirits and the souls of ancestors. This man is either a scholar of macabre folklore, or he's not just a man. The comment struck a chord of primal fear in Akari. She had felt it all along, the sense that this was something more than a simple crime. The not just a man part echoed the deepest, most unspeakable dread in her own heart. Then she came to a series of posts from a user named Okiri. The name itself, a common Japanese word for welcome home, seemed strangely ominous in this context. Okiri's posts were different from the others. They were calm, analytical, and unervingly perceptive. The first post read, "You're right to be scared. You are dealing with something that operates outside of normal logic. The police are useless here. They are looking for a criminal. You are being hunted by a ghost." A flurry of replies followed, some calling Okiri a crank, others intrigued. But Okiri ignored them and replied directly to Akari's original post. "He chose you for a reason. Think back. When did it start? Was there an event, no matter how small, that preceded the first time you saw him on the platform? A trip you took? An object you found? A place you visited? These things don't begin without a trigger." Akari stared at the words. A trigger. She had assumed it started that Tuesday on the platform. But had it? She thought back, trying to peel back the layers of memory from before the fear began. The weeks leading up to it were a blur of work and sleep. Nothing stood out. She hadn't taken any trips. She hadn't found any strange objects. Kiri posted again. "The places are important. Sanganjaya, the Tama River, the mountain in Nagano. Is there a connection between them? A history? He is not random. The footprint you found was not from a salaryman's shoe. That's what he wants you to think. That shoe is too clean, too impractical. It's a costume. A performance for you, the audience. A costume." The idea was jarring. The rumpled gray suit, the briefcase. Was it all a deliberate disguise? A uniform designed to make him blend in, to make him seem like just another faceless part of the city, while in reality he was something else entirely. The final post from Okiri was the one that made Akari stop breathing. "The long black hair on your pillow. You need to be very careful. This is a classic sign of possession or spiritual attachment from a Yurei, specifically a female ghost, often one who died of sorrow or rage. He might not be working alone, or he might be a vessel for something else. He is trying to replace you. He left the hair on the pillow to suggest a new person is sleeping in your bed. He sent the email to your friend to begin erasing you. You fled your apartment, but you took your suitcase. Did you check everything you packed? Every pocket? Every fold? He has been in your home. He could have left you another gift." Akari looked at her suitcase, lying at the foot of the hotel bed. She had packed in such a blind panic. She hadn't checked anything. With a dawning horror, she crawled over to the suitcase and unzipped it. She began to pull out her clothes, shaking each item out. A shirt, pair of jeans, a sweater, nothing. She emptied the main compartment. Then she unzipped the front pocket, where she had stuffed her passport and a few other documents. Tucked inside her passport, between the page with her photo and the adjacent visa page, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed, and brittle. It wasn't hers. Her fingers trembled so badly she could barely unfold it. It was a photograph, a small, black-and-white portrait from decades ago. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s. She had long, dark hair, parted in the middle. Her face was pale, her expression sorrowful, her eyes dark and empty. She was wearing a simple kimono. Behind her, standing slightly to her left, was a man. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his features were clear enough. He was wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit. He was not smiling. His eyes were fixed on the camera with a chillingly blank, possessive stare. It was him. The face was younger, the suit a different style, but the eyes were the same. The absolute, soul-freezing emptiness. It was the man from the train platform. Akari dropped the photograph as if it had burned her. It fluttered to the cheap hotel carpet. This was impossible. This photo was 50, maybe 60 years old. He looked exactly the same, just older now. It didn't make sense. She scrambled for her laptop, her mind reeling. She had to reply to Akari. This person knew something. She typed a frantic message on the forum. Akari, I found something. A photograph. It's him, but it's old. And there's a woman with long black hair. The same hair from the pillow. Who are they? She sat back, her whole body shaking, her eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the mysterious user to reply. The hotel room, which had felt like a sterile refuge, now felt like a cage. The photograph on the floor was a portal to a past that was inexplicably, terrifyingly intertwined with her present. The man in the gray suit was not just a stalker. He was something older, something that defied time, and he had been playing this game for a very, very long time. The woman in the photo, was she his last victim? And was Akari destined to be the next? Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. The cursor on the screen blinked. And then, a notification. Akari had replied, "Do not post the photograph. Do not show it to anyone. He will know. The woman is the one you should be afraid of. He is the vessel, but she is the passenger. She is the one who wants your life. You have to find out who she was. The location of the photograph is your only clue. Look at the background. Is there anything there? A building? A sign? A tree?" Akari picked up the photograph, her hand shaking. The background was blurry, but there was something. Behind the sorrowful woman, just over her shoulder, was a stone lantern, the kind one finds at a shrine or a temple. And behind the lantern, partially obscured, was the distinctive shape of a torii gate. But it wasn't a normal gate. It had a unique, twisted shape to its top beam, almost like two serpents intertwined. She had never seen anything like it. She described the gate to Akari. The reply came back almost instantly. "I know the place. It's an old, abandoned shrine on the Izu Peninsula. A place with a dark history. A place of Enkiri, the severing of ties. People went there to pray for an escape from bad relationships, from bad luck. But sometimes, the spirits of the place would help in their own way. They wouldn't just sever the tie. They would erase the person entirely. You have to go there. It's where this all began for her. It might be the only place you can end it. The Izu Peninsula, a place Akari associated with sunny beaches, hot springs, and weekend getaways. The thought of going there now, not for leisure but for a desperate, terrifying pilgrimage, felt surreal. The instructions from Akari were both a lifeline and a death sentence. To go to the source of the darkness seemed like walking directly into the monster's lair. But to stay in Tokyo, waiting for his next move, felt like a slow, inevitable surrender. "Why do I have to go there?" she typed back to Akari, her fingers fumbling on the keys. "What am I supposed to do?" The reply was swift and cryptic. "You cannot fight a curse by running from it. You have to confront its origin. He is bound to her and she is bound to that place. You have to find her name. A name has power. You are looking for a reason, a story. A ghost is just a story that hasn't finished. You must find the ending. Find her name. Find the ending." The words sounded like a riddle from a fairy tale. Akari spent another sleepless night in the Ikebukuro hotel. The photograph lay face down on the bedside table, but she could feel its presence, a cold spot in the room. She was torn. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get on a plane and leave Japan forever. But a new, unfamiliar feeling was taking root alongside the fear. A stubborn, defiant anger. This was her life. He and the sorrowful woman in the photograph had no right to it. The next morning, she made her decision. She went to Shinjuku Station, a place she now navigated with a constant, low-level hum of anxiety, and bought a ticket for the Odoriko Limited Express train, bound for the Izu Peninsula. She didn't know the exact location of the shrine, only that it was somewhere on that stretch of coastline. She hoped that once she was there, she could find it. Maybe the twisted torii gate was a known landmark. The train ride was beautiful. It traced the coastline of Sagami Bay, offering stunning views of the sparkling blue water and the island of Oshima in the distance. The other passengers were tourists and families, laughing and pointing at the scenery. Akari sat amongst them like a visitor from another world. The grim reality of her mission, a stark contrast to the holiday atmosphere. She kept the old photograph tucked deep inside her purse. She got off the train in Edo, a large, well-known hot spring town. It seemed as good a place as any to start. She found a small tourist information center near the station and, with a feigned air of casual curiosity, approached the woman at the desk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice strained. "I'm interested in old shrines. I saw a picture of one with a very unusual torii gate. It looked like it was made of two twisted branches, or maybe serpents." The woman, who had been smiling politely, frowned in concentration. "A twisted torii gate? That's not one of the famous ones. We have many shrines, but I don't know of any like that. Are you sure it was an Aizu?" "I think so," Akari said, her heart sinking. "It was in an old black and white photograph." "Ah, old." The woman's eyes lit up with a different kind of interest. "Perhaps you mean the Serpent's Gate at the Enkiri Jinja? The divorce shrine? It's not really a tourist spot. It's mostly abandoned. They say it's bad luck to go there unless you have a very good reason." Kari's blood ran cold. Enkiri Jinja, the severing of ties shrine. Kiri had been right. Yes, that might be it. Where is it? The woman gave her a strange look. "It's a few kilometers south of here, up in the hills overlooking the coast. There's no bus that goes directly there. You'd have to take a local bus to the coast road and walk up the mountain path. It's very overgrown. Are you sure you want to go? There are many more beautiful temples to see." "I'm sure," Akari said, her voice more firm than she felt. "Thank you." She got directions and set off. The bus ride took her out of the town and along a winding coastal highway. On one side, steep, forested hills rose sharply. On the other, the cliffs dropped down to the churning Pacific Ocean. The scenery was breathtakingly beautiful and deeply lonely. She got off at a desolate bus stop with no shelter, just a rusty sign. A narrow, unpaved path led up into the dark green hills. The entrance was marked by a crumbling stone pillar, half swallowed by vines. The air immediately grew cooler and damper as she stepped under the canopy of ancient cedar trees. The path was steep and difficult. Loose stones shifted under her feet, and tangled roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip her with every step. The silence was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the far-off cry of a hawk. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. She felt as if the trees themselves had eyes. After 20 minutes of strenuous climbing, she saw it, the torii gate. It was exactly as it had been in the photograph, though now it was covered in moss and lichen. The two posts were carved to look like the bodies of serpents, and the top beam was a grotesque, twisting knot of their heads. It was a masterpiece of unsettling craftsmanship. It didn't feel like a gateway to a holy place. It felt like an entrance to something else. Beyond the gate was a small, dilapidated clearing. The main shrine building was little more than a collapsing ruin. The roof had caved in, and the wooden walls were rotten and black with age. Weeds and small trees grew up through the floorboards. To one side was the stone lantern from the photograph, its top askew. The place felt saturated with a profound and ancient sadness. It was heavy in the air, a palpable miasma of countless desperate prayers, of sorrow and anger left to fester for centuries. Akari walked slowly into the clearing, her sneakers crunching on the dead leaves. She approached the remains of the shrine building. What was she supposed to be looking for? A name. Akari had told her to find a name. She searched the area around the main building. She found several small, stone Jizo statues, their faces eroded by time, their red bibs disintegrated into tatters. There were piles of Emma, the small wooden prayer plaques, but they were all rotten and illegible, their ink washed away by decades of rain. She felt a wave of despair. This was a fool's errand. There was nothing here but decay. She had come all this way for nothing. Then she noticed a smaller, secondary structure off to the side, tucked away in a grove of bamboo. It was a storage shed of some kind, a kara, and it seemed to be in slightly better condition than the main hall. Its thick plaster walls were cracked but mostly intact, and its heavy wooden door was still hanging on its iron hinges. With a sense of dread, she approached it. The door was held shut by a simple wooden latch. It was swollen with damp and stiff, but when she put her shoulder into it, it groaned open with a sound of protest. The inside of the kara was dark and smelled of dust, mold, and something else, a faint, cloying floral scent. Gardenias. Her heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled in her bag for her phone, turning on its small flashlight. She swept the beam across the interior. The room was filled with old, forgotten junk. Broken pottery, stacks of yellowed newspapers, rotting fabric. And against the back wall, there was a row of wooden boxes. They looked like memorial tablets, the kind used to store the ashes or records of the dead. Most were blank, their paint peeled away. But on one, near the bottom of the stack, there was writing. The calligraphy was old and faded, but still legible in the harsh light of her phone. It was a name, Kurikawa Chiyo. Below the name was a date from the Meiji era over a century ago, and below the date, a single line of text. Severed by betrayal, bound by water, Kurikawa Chiyo. Was this her? The woman from the photograph. As Akari stared at the name, she heard a sound from outside. A soft, rhythmic clinking. Ting, ting. The sound of a wind chime. Akari froze, every muscle tensed. The sound was coming from the clearing. It was impossible. There was no wind. She backed out of the kara slowly, her phone held in front of her like a weapon. She peered out into the clearing. In the center, hanging from the low branch of a cedar tree, was a dragonfly wind chime. It was identical to the one he had sent her. It was swaying gently, chiming in the still, heavy air, and standing beneath it, his back to her, was a man in a rumpled gray suit, holding a plain black briefcase. He turned his head slowly, his neck seeming to move at an unnatural angle. He looked directly at her. His face was pale, his eyes were blank voids, and then he smiled. It was a small, horrifyingly polite smile that did not reach his eyes. He raised a hand and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The same nod from the train platform. A quiet acknowledgement. A greeting. Kari didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her lungs. She was paralyzed, pinned in place by his empty gaze. She had walked right into his trap. The forum, Okiri, the photograph, the shrine. It had all been a lie. A carefully constructed path to lead her here, to this isolated, forgotten place of sorrow, where no one would ever find her. Okiri wasn't a helpful stranger. Kiri was him. He had been guiding her all along. The realization crashed over Akari with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs and rooting her feet to the ground. Okiri, welcome home. The name was a sick joke. He hadn't just been following her. He had been puppeteering her, expertly pulling the strings of her fear, using her desperation to lead her into the heart of his web. The feeling of empowerment she'd felt from fighting back was an illusion he had carefully crafted. The man under the tree took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The polite, vacant smile never left his face. The wind chime above his head continued its soft, impossible chiming. Akari's paralysis finally broke. A surge of pure adrenaline shot through her, overriding the complex terror with a simple primal command. Run. She turned and scrambled back down the overgrown path, heedless of the rocks and roots. She didn't look back. She could hear him behind her, not running, but walking at a steady, unhurried pace. The sound of his leather shoes on the dirt and leaves was calm and rhythmic, a terrifying counterpoint to her own panicked gasps for breath. It was the sound of a predator that knows its prey has no escape. Branches whipped at her face, and a thorny vine tore at her sleeve. She stumbled, catching herself on the trunk of a tree, her palms scraping against the rough bark. She risked a glance over her shoulder. He was still there, about 20 meters behind her, moving with the same relentless, unhurried gait. He hadn't gotten any closer, but he hadn't fallen behind, either. He was pacing her. She pushed off the tree and ran harder, her lungs burning, a sob catching in her throat. The beautiful, lonely forest was now a prison, its ancient trees silent witnesses to her terror. She reached the crumbling stone pillar that marked the entrance to the path and burst out onto the deserted coast road, the bright sun a shock after the gloom of the forest. She looked both ways. The road was empty. No cars, no people. The bus stop was a lonely sentinel. She knew the next bus wasn't for at least an hour. She had only one choice. She started running down the asphalt, toward Ito, her sneakers slapping against the pavement. She ran for what felt like an eternity, her body screaming in protest. After a few minutes, she dared to look back again. He had emerged from the path and was standing by the side of the road, watching her. He made no move to follow. He just stood there, a dark figure against the lush green of the hills, his form starting to shimmer and blur in the heat haze rising from the road. Akari didn't stop to question it. She turned and kept running, her gaze fixed on the winding road ahead. Finally, in the distance, she saw a car approaching. She waved her arms frantically, stepping into the middle of the road. It was a small, white K-truck, the kind used by farmers and fishermen. It slowed to a stop a few feet from her. An old man with a deeply tanned, wrinkled face and a white towel wrapped around his head leaned out the window. "What's wrong, miss?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You look like you've seen a Uriai." "Please," Akari gasped, leaning against the door of the truck, struggling to speak. Can you give me a ride to the station? In Ito, please." The old man studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her torn sleeve, her scratched face, her panicked expression. He seemed to make a decision. "Get in." Akari scrambled into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut and locking it immediately. The cab smelled of salt, diesel, and fish. It was the most wonderful smell in the world. As the old man put the truck in gear and pulled away, she looked back one last time. The spot where the man had been standing was empty. He was gone. The old fisherman didn't ask any more questions. He seemed to understand that she was in no state to answer them. He just drove, humming a tuneless song to himself. Akari sat huddled against the door, watching the scenery go by, her body trembling with the aftershocks of her terror. When they reached Ito Station, she tried to offer the man some money, but he waved it away. "Just be careful, miss," he said, his expression serious. "There are old things in these hills. It's best to leave them alone." He then drove off, leaving her on the curb. She didn't wait. She went straight into the station and bought a ticket for the next train back to Tokyo. Any train. She didn't care. She just had to get away from Aizu. On the train, surrounded by the comforting anonymity of the crowd, a sliver of rational thought began to penetrate her fear. Kiri was him. He had lured her to the shrine. But why? What was the point of letting her go? Why reveal himself only to let her escape? It didn't make sense. Unless the escape was part of the game. Unless her discovery of the name Kirikawa was exactly what he and she wanted. Severed by betrayal, bound by water. The words from the memorial tablet echoed in her mind. What did they mean? When she got back to Tokyo, she didn't go to a hotel. Hiding was pointless. He knew where she was at all times. The realization was strangely liberating. If she couldn't hide, she had to understand. She went to the only place she could think of, the National Diet Library, Japan's largest and most comprehensive archive. Under the high ceilings and in the profound, studious silence of the main reading room, she felt a flicker of purpose. This was a battle of information. He had used information to manipulate her. Now she would use it to fight back. She started with the name, Kirikawa, and the place, Aizu. She requested access to old newspaper archives from the Meiji era, microfilms of regional papers that had long since gone out of print. It took hours of scrolling through fuzzy, black and white pages filled with forgotten news. The process was tedious and eye-straining. She read about local politics, crop yields, shipping news. She was about to give up for the day when she found it. It was a small article, tucked away in the back pages of the Aizu Shimbun, dated autumn 1888. The headline was Tragedy at Cape Nagatsuro. The article described the discovery of a woman's body, washed ashore near the Cape, a place known for its treacherous cliffs and powerful currents. The woman was identified as Kurikawa Chiyo, a 22-year-old from a nearby village. The authorities had ruled her death a suicide. She had apparently thrown herself from the cliffs. But the article contained another, more chilling detail. Miss Kurikawa had been engaged to be married to a man from Tokyo, a promising young merchant named Suzuki Kenji. A week before her death, he had abruptly broken off the engagement, having arranged a more profitable marriage with the daughter of a wealthy business associate. The article mentioned that the heartbroken Chiyo had been seen visiting the Akari Jinja in the days leading up to her death. Suzuki Kenji. The name was so common, so plain. Akari's hands grew cold as she read the final paragraph. It was an editor's note, added a week after the initial report. A strange postscript to the tragic death of Miss Kurikawa. Her former fiancé, Mr. Suzuki Kenji, who was visiting Aizu to settle his affairs, disappeared without a trace on the night of her funeral. He was last seen walking toward the hills near Cape Nagatsuro. An extensive search revealed nothing. He was never seen again. Akari stared at the microfilm, her mind racing to connect the pieces. Chiyo, betrayed and heartbroken, had gone to the shrine to sever her ties with Suzuki. But the shrine's dark power, or her own grief, had done something more. She had bound him to her. Suzuki hadn't just disappeared. He had become the ghost's first victim, his identity consumed, his existence transformed into a vessel for Chiyo's unending sorrow and rage. He was now the instrument of her curse, forced to wander the world, finding other women to replace her, only to have the vengeful spirit of Chiyo destroy them. The man in the gray suit wasn't Suzuki. He was the idea of Suzuki, a blank, anonymous man, a costume worn by an ancient curse. The sorrowful woman in the photograph wasn't the victim. She was the predator. A new, horrifying thought struck Akari. The hair on her pillow, the long, black hair of Kurikawa Chiyo. The email sent to Yuna to begin erasing her. The final instruction from Okiri Suzuki, the stalker. You have to go there. It's where this all began for her. It might be the only place you can end it. It was a lie. He wasn't leading her there to be killed. He was leading her there to perform a ritual. By finding Chiyo's name, by learning her story, Akari hadn't armed herself. She had forged a connection. She had invited the spirit into her own life. He hadn't let her escape from the shrine. He had released her, like a baited hook cast into the sea. She was now the target fully and completely. The curse was no longer just following her. It was attaching itself to her. The weight of this new understanding settled on Akari like a physical shroud. She left the library in a daze, the bustling Tokyo evening barely registering. The city lights seemed garish and hostile. Every passing salaryman in a dark suit was a potential specter, a manifestation of the curse she now carried. She went back to the hotel in Ikebukuro, but the sterile room no longer offered any comfort. It felt like a cage where she was the specimen, being observed by unseen eyes. The photograph of Chiyo and Suzuki was still on the table. She looked at it now with a new, horrifying clarity. She saw the possessive emptiness in his eyes, but she also saw the profound, bottomless sorrow in Chiyo's. It was a sorrow that had curdled over a century into a predatory hunger. That night, the subtle hauntings escalated. The faint scent of gardenias was no longer faint. It was a thick, cloying perfume that filled the room, making it hard to breathe. In the periphery of her vision, she saw fleeting movements, a flicker of a long, black kimono sleeve vanishing behind the curtains, the shadow of a slender hand passing over the wall. When she looked in the mirror, she saw, for a split second, a pale face with sorrowful eyes looking back at her instead of her own. She was being haunted, not by him, but by her. Chiyo. She frantically logged back onto the forum. The thread she had started was still active. People were asking for updates, worried about her sudden silence after her frantic post about the photograph. She ignored them all and sent a direct, private message to the user ShrineMaiden88. the one who had first mentioned Uriai and the significance of the objects. It was a desperate, long shot. "You were right," she wrote. "It's a Uriai. Her name is Kurikawa Chio. She died in 1888. I think I've made a terrible mistake. I went to the shrine where she is bound. He tricked me into it. Now the haunting is getting worse. I think she's trying to possess me. Is there any way to fight this? Any way to protect myself?" She didn't expect a reply. It was late, but within minutes, a notification popped up. Shrine Maiden 88 had responded. "This is very bad. By learning her story and visiting her place of power, you have created a powerful bond. You have acknowledged her, and that is a form of invitation. She doesn't want to just scare you. She wants to live again, through you. You need to perform a ritual of separation, an enkiri of your own." "How?" Akari typed back instantly. "The shrine in Aizu is a trap. Do not go back there," Shrine Maiden 88 replied. "That is her territory. You need to find a place of stronger, purer power. A place that can overwhelm her influence. There are a few temples in Tokyo known for their exorcism and purification rituals. The most powerful is a small, unassuming temple in Sugamo called Kogenji. It's famous for the Toganuki Jizo, a statue believed to heal illnesses and remove pain. Pain can also mean spiritual affliction." The message continued with specific instructions. "You will need an object that represents your connection to her. The photograph is the most potent. You will also need something that is purely and uniquely yours. A lock of your own hair is best. You must go to the temple at the hour of the ox, between 1 and 3 in the morning. That is the time when the veil between worlds is thinnest. You must wash your hands and mouth at the Chozuya, the purification fountain. Then you must present the objects to the Jizo statue. Pray. Don't pray for her to be destroyed. That will only feed her anger. Pray for her peace. Pray for her to be released from her sorrow. And pray for your own tie to her to be severed." It sounded like something out of a ghost story, a folk remedy for a spiritual sickness. But it was the only hope she had. The next day, Akari prepared. She bought a small, elegant paper box. She went to a pharmacy and bought a tiny pair of scissors. Back in her hotel room, with a shaking hand, she snipped a small lock of her own hair and placed it in the box. Then, forcing herself to touch it, she picked up the cursed photograph of Chio and Suzuki and placed it in the box on top of her hair. She closed the lid. Felt like sealing a tomb. That night, she waited. The hours ticked by. The haunting in the room intensified. She could hear soft, weeping sobs coming from the corner. The scent of gardenias was so strong it made her dizzy. She refused to look in the mirror. She just sat on the bed, clutching the small box, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting. At midnight, she left the hotel. She took the Yamanote line to Sugamo. The train was mostly empty, carrying a few late-night workers and drunk partiers. The contrast between their ordinary lives and her terrifying mission was a chasm. Sugamo, known as Grandma's Harajuku, was silent and deserted. The shops along the famous Jizodori shopping street were all shuttered. Akari walked down the empty street, her footsteps echoing. The temple, Kogenji, was a small, dark oasis of tranquility in the sleeping city. She pushed open the heavy wooden gate and stepped inside. The temple grounds were lit by a few low-standing stone lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was cool and smelled of incense and pine. It felt peaceful, a world away from the malevolent energy of the shrine in Aizu. She found the Chozuya fountain. A stone dragon's mouth trickled a steady stream of pure, cold water into a basin. Following the instructions, she rinsed her hands and then her mouth, the water a shock of cold. She felt as if she were washing away some of the filth of the curse. Then she approached the main hall. The Toganuki Jizo statue was housed inside, but the hall was closed for the night. However, in front of the hall was a smaller, stone statue of the Bodhisattva Canon, which people would wash with water for blessings. Shrine Maiden 88 had said this would suffice. Akari stood before the serene, stone face of the canon, the small box clutched in her hand. She took a deep breath. She could feel a presence behind her, a cold spot in the warm night air. She could hear a faint, sorrowful whisper coiling around her ears. Betrayal? Bound? Alone? It was Chio. She had followed her here. Don't turn around, a new voice said, low and firm. Akari flinched, startled. A woman had emerged from the shadows near the main hall. She was dressed in the simple white and red robes of a Shinto priestess, or Miko. It was Shrine Maiden 88. She was young, no older than Akari, with a calm, serious face. I thought you might need help, the Miko said, her eyes not on Akari, but on the space just behind her. She is strong. You cannot do this alone. The Miko stepped forward, holding a string of prayer beads. She began to chant, a low, melodic sutra that filled the small courtyard. The air seemed to shimmer. The cold spot behind Akari intensified, and the sorrowful whispers grew louder, twisting into a hiss of rage. Now, the Miko commanded, open the box. Make your prayer. Akari's hands were trembling so violently she could barely open the lid. She took out the photograph and the lock of her own hair. She held them up to the cannon statue. Kurikawa Chio, she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. I know your story. I know your pain. I pray for your spirit to find peace. I pray for you to be released from your anger and your sorrow. Let the water wash you clean. Let your ties to this world be severed. She then looked at her own lock of hair. And I pray that my tie to you is severed. Leave me in peace. Our stories are not the same. This life is mine. As she spoke, the wind suddenly picked up, whipping through the temple grounds, rustling the leaves of the ancient ginkgo tree. The whispers behind her rose to a piercing shriek of pure agony and fury. It was a sound that scraped at the inside of Akari's skull. Hold fast, the Miko said, her voice rising in her chant, the prayer beads clicking rhythmically in her hands. Akari didn't know what else to do. She took the photograph of Chio and Suzuki and, with a final surge of desperate strength, tore it in half, separating the woman from the man. She dropped the pieces at the foot of the statue. The moment the photograph was torn, the shriek stopped. It was cut off as if a plug had been pulled. The wind died down instantly, and profound, unnatural silence fell over the temple. The cold spot behind her vanished. Akari stood, panting, her body drenched in a cold sweat. She looked at the Miko who had stopped chanting. The young woman's face was pale, but her expression was calm. It is done, the Miko said quietly. You have severed the connection. You have finished her story. And him? Akari asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. The man, Suzuki, you tore the photograph. You separated them. She was his anchor, the source of his curse. Without her, he is just a memory, a ghost with no purpose. He will fade. He can no longer harm you. A wave of relief so powerful it made her knees weak washed over Akari. It was over. It was finally over. She sagged against the stone base of the cannon statue, tears of exhaustion and release finally streaming down her face. The long nightmare was at an end. She was free. The silence in the temple courtyard was deep and resonant. It wasn't an empty silence, but one filled with a newfound peace, the oral equivalent of a fever breaking. Akari remained on the ground for a long time, the adrenaline slowly seeping out of her, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. The Miko, whose name she learned was Asami, waited patiently, her presence a calming anchor in the aftermath of the spiritual storm. Finally, Asami helped her to her feet. You should not be alone tonight, she said, her voice gentle. My family has rooms attached to a small shrine not far from here. You can rest there. Akari was too exhausted to argue. She nodded and followed Asami through the sleeping streets of Tokyo. The city that had felt so menacing for so long now seemed almost beautiful in its quiet repose. They arrived at a small, residential shrine, the kind tucked between apartment buildings and noodle shops, and Asami led her to a simple tatami room that smelled of old wood and clean linen. Akari fell onto the offered futon and was asleep before she could even process a coherent thought of gratitude. Her sleep was dreamless and heavy, the first truly restorative rest she'd had in what felt like a lifetime. When she woke, the morning sun was streaming into the room, and the sounds of a waking city, the distant clang of a train, the calls of street vendors, were no longer omens of dread, but simply the sounds of life. The oppressive weight that had been crushing her for weeks was gone. She could breathe again. Over a simple breakfast of rice and miso soup with asami, Akari finally asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Why did you help me? You didn't even know me." Asami sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. "My family have been caretakers of shrines for generations. We are sensitive to certain disturbances. I saw your post on the forum. The details, the patterns, it felt authentic. It had the texture of a true spiritual affliction. When you said you were going to Kogenji, I had a strong feeling I needed to be there. Let's just say a prayer was answered for me as well." Akari spent the next 2 days in the quiet sanctuary of the shrine, healing. She spoke with Asami at length, telling her the entire story from the very beginning, filling in the gaps that her frantic forum posts had left out. The act of speaking it all aloud, to someone who understood and believed her without question, was a final, crucial part of her recovery. It validated her experience, cementing it not as a psychotic break, but as a real battle she had fought and won. On the 3rd day, she knew she had to face the remnants of her old life. She needed to go back to her apartment in Setagaya. The thought still produced a knot of anxiety in her stomach, but it was a manageable, rational fear now, not the paralyzing terror of before. Asami offered to go with her, but Akari politely declined. This was something she had to do alone. The journey to Setagaya felt like visiting a foreign country she had once lived in. The station, the streets, the vending machines, they were all familiar, yet she was seeing them through new eyes. She was no longer prey, scurrying through a landscape of fear. She stood before her apartment building, took a deep breath, and went inside. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was silent. When she reached her door, she saw a small, white envelope taped to it. It was from her landlord. It was a notice of eviction for non-payment of rent and abandonment of the property. Instead of panic, Akari felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made for her. This place was no longer her home in any sense of the word. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was still and silent. The air was stale, but the cloying scent of gardenias was completely gone. She walked through the small space, a ghost visiting her own past. The chopstick was still on the floor where she'd dropped it. The book was still sticking out of the bookshelf. On the pillow, the single, long strand of black hair was gone. She packed methodically, not with the frantic panic of her previous flight, but with a calm sense of purpose. She was not just packing belongings. She was closing a chapter of her life. She sorted things into 2 piles, keep and discard. She found she wanted to discard most of it. The clothes she had worn during the worst of the haunting, the books she had been reading, the bedding. It all felt contaminated, remnants of a life that wasn't hers. As she was clearing out the closet, she found the box that the dragonfly wind chime had come in, shoved in the back corner. She had forgotten all about it in her haste. She picked it up. It was empty, of course, but as she turned it over, a small, folded piece of paper fell out from underneath one of the inner flaps. It hadn't been there before. She knew it. Her heart began to beat a little faster. With trepidation, she unfolded it. It wasn't a photograph. It was a letter written in a shaky, old-fashioned script. It was a confession. It was from Suzuki Kenji. To whoever finds this, the letter began. "My name is Suzuki Kenji, and I am a prisoner. I did not want to leave her. I loved her, but my family forced me to end our engagement for the sake of a business deal. My weakness, my cowardice, cost Chio her life. On the night of her funeral, I went to the cliffs to end my own. But she was waiting for me. Her spirit, full of a sorrow so great it became a rage, would not let me go. She bound me to her. For over a century, I have been her instrument, a phantom force to haunt the living, to search for a new vessel for her pain. I am a ghost haunted by a ghost. I have no control. I am forced to play my part, to set the stage for her terrible ritual. The letter continued, describing the cycle of the curse, how he was compelled to find young women who mirrored Chio in some way, women who were lonely, or living far from home, or feeling the pressures of city life. He described how he was forced to create the narrative of fear, to guide them, to test them. The final paragraph made Akari's breath catch. But this time was different. The last one. The girl named Akari. She did something no one else has. The others were consumed by fear. They broke. She did not. She fought back. She went to the shrine. She learned the story, but she did not surrender to it. Her spirit was stronger than my prison. When she tore our photograph, she did not just sever her tie to Chio. She severed my tie as well. For the first time in 130 years, I am free from her. I am fading. My story is finally ending. This letter is my last act, a final apology to all the lives our shared curse has touched. And to Akari, a thank you. You did not just save yourself. You saved me, too. Tears welled in Akari's eyes as she finished the letter. It was a confession, an apology, and a thank you from a ghost. The man in the gray suit hadn't been a monster. He had been a victim, just like her, trapped in an unending nightmare. The entire haunting had been a complex, tragic play, and she had been the final actor who had managed to rewrite the ending for everyone. She folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. It was a secret she would carry forever. She finished her packing, leaving behind the shell of her old life. She took only a small suitcase of essentials and the box containing her torn lock of hair and the two halves of the photograph. She left the key on the counter and walked out of the apartment for the last time, not looking back. Her future was a blank page, and for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. She was the author of her own story now. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and the quiet, ordinary, beautiful world was waiting for her. The weeks that followed were a period of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. Akari found a new apartment, a small but bright room in a modern building in Kichijoji. The neighborhood, with its bustling shopping streets, beautiful park, and laid-back atmosphere, felt like a different country compared to the anonymous concrete canyons of her old life. The first time she unlocked the door to her new home, a home with no history, no ghosts, she felt a simple, profound joy. She found a part-time job working at a large bookstore, a place filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages and the gentle murmur of fellow book lovers. It was a peaceful, grounding environment. She reconnected with Yuna, feeding her a carefully edited version of her ordeal. A story about a severe stalker that had forced her to move and quit her job, omitting the supernatural elements entirely. "Oh my God, Akari-chan, that's horrible," Yuna had said over the phone, her voice filled with genuine shock and sympathy. "Why didn't you tell me? You should have called me. I would have come and stayed with you." "I was too scared," Akari had said, the lie tasting like ash. "I just had to get away. I'm sorry I worried you with that strange email." "Don't be sorry. Are you okay now? Are you safe?" "I'm safe now," Akari had replied, and for the first time she believed it. Life settled into a new, gentle rhythm. Work, grocery shopping, long walks in Inokashira Park, evenings spent reading in her quiet, safe apartment. The terror of the past months began to feel like a fever dream, a story that had happened to someone else. She kept the letter from Suzuki Kenji, tucked away in a small wooden box with the two halves of the photograph, a private memorial to a battle no one else knew she had fought. The first sign that something was wrong was small, so subtle she almost dismissed it. She was on her way home from work, standing on the crowded platform at Kichijoji Station. As the train pulled in, she glanced across the tracks to the opposite platform. For a fleeting second, she saw a man standing there, an older man in a dated-looking overcoat. He was transparent. She could see the station's concrete wall and a poster for a concert right through his body. He looked bewildered, his head turning as if searching for a train that would never arrive. Akari blinked, and he was gone. She shook her head, her heart beating a little faster. A trick of the light. An afterimage burned onto her retinas from the train's headlights. It was a trauma response, her mind still conditioned to see threats on train platforms. That's all it was. A week later, it happened again. She was sitting on a bench in the park, eating a sandwich on her lunch break. She saw a young woman sitting by the edge of the pond, dressed in a high school uniform, though it was the middle of a weekday. The girl was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. But like the man at the station, she had a strange, watery quality to her appearance. The weeping willows behind her were visible through her shoulders. Akari felt a wave of inexplicable sadness wash over her, a sorrow so profound it almost brought tears to her own eyes. It was a familiar feeling, an echo of the pain she had felt at the Jinja. She looked down at her sandwich for a moment, and when she looked back up, the girl was gone. This time it was harder to dismiss. The feeling had been too real. The experiences became more frequent. A child's faint laughter in an empty playground. The ghostly image of a woman in a kimono walking through a closed crosswalk, oblivious to the cars passing through her. Akari was seeing ghosts. Not just Chiyo or Suzuki, but dozens of them. Lost souls lingering in the places of their last moments, invisible to everyone but her. The curse hadn't been destroyed. The ritual at Kogenji hadn't been a cure. It had been an amputation. It had severed her connection to Chiyo, but the wound it left behind had stayed open. Her experience had permanently altered her, like a radio that, once tuned to a forbidden frequency, could now never be fully turned off. It was forever picking up the static of the other world. The fear that returned was of a different nature. It was not the sharp, predatory fear of being hunted. It was a deeper, more existential dread. Was this her life now? To be a lone witness to the city's countless secret sorrows? The freedom she had cherished felt like a lie. She had escaped one prison only to find herself in another, a much larger one whose walls were the veil between life and death. One evening, as she was locking up the bookstore with her manager, she saw him. Not a stranger this time. It was the faint, translucent image of Suzuki Kenji. He was standing across the street, under a streetlight, looking not at her, but at his own transparent hands, a look of profound confusion on his face. He was dressed in his now familiar rumpled gray suit. He looked pathetic, lost, and utterly, eternally alone. He was fading, just as his letter had said, but the process was slow, and she was the only one who could see it. He wasn't a threat. He was just a sad, lingering memory. She stood frozen, the key still in the lock. Her manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Inoue, followed her gaze. "What is it, Tanaka-san? See someone you know?" Akari stared at the fading ghost of Suzuki. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No one at all." She understood now. The Miko Asami had been right. The curse was broken. Chiyo was at peace. Suzuki was no longer a vessel for the curse. But the final part of his letter, his thank you, was a tragic irony. He had been freed from Chiyo only to be trapped in his own lonely dissolution, and she, his final victim, was now his only witness. Her freedom was to be forever tied to him, not by a curse of malice, but by a bond of shared trauma. She started seeing him more often, a faint image of him on a crowded train, staring out the window, a flicker of his form in the reflection of a shop window. He never acknowledged her. He never looked at her. He was simply present, a constant, silent reminder of what she had endured and what she had become. The story was not over. It had simply entered a new, quieter, and perhaps more tragic phase. There was no monster to fight, no curse to break. There was only the long, slow fade of a forgotten man and the young woman who was now, for the rest of her life, haunted by his salvation. The quiet haunting became the new texture of Akari's life. The ghosts of strangers were fleeting and impersonal, like snippets of conversations overheard in a crowd, but the ghost of Suzuki Kenji was a constant, personal shadow. His presence was a quiet weight, a melancholy that colored the edges of her days. She tried to ignore him, to live her life as if he wasn't there, a translucent figure perpetually at the edge of her vision. But ignoring a ghost is a difficult thing to do. She fell into a deep, functional loneliness. How could she ever be close to anyone again? How could she explain that the reason she sometimes stared blankly into the middle distance was because she was watching a Magiera ghost fade from existence? Her secret was a wall, separating her from the normal, tangible world. The friends she made at the bookstore remained at a polite distance. Her conversations with her family became more stilted, her visits less frequent. She was drifting, becoming a ghost in her own life. The seasons changed. Summer's oppressive heat gave way to the crisp, cool air of autumn. The leaves in Inokashira Park turned brilliant shades of red and gold. Akari watched the world change, but her own internal landscape remained static, haunted by the same silent companion. Suzuki's form was growing fainter, his edges blurring more each week, like an old photograph exposed to the sun for too long. Sometimes, she could barely see him at all, just a shimmer in the air, a subtle distortion of the light. One rainy November evening, she was walking home from work, huddled under an umbrella. As she passed a small, local shrine, not Kogenji, just an ordinary neighborhood Inari shrine with its twin stone foxes, she saw him. He was standing just inside the torii gate, looking out at the rain. He was more solid than she had seen him in months, as if the rain and the gathering twilight had given him substance. And for the first time since she had torn the photograph, he looked directly at her. Akari stopped, her umbrella dipping, letting the cold rain run down her face. His eyes, once so terrifyingly blank, were now filled with a deep, weary sadness. There was no malice in them, only a silent plea. He raised a hand, not in a nod, but in a slow, beckoning gesture, then turned and walked deeper into the shrine grounds, toward the main hall. He was asking her to follow. Her heart pounded, a familiar drumbeat of fear. But this was different. It wasn't the fear of a predator, but the fear of the unknown. For months, he had been a passive presence. Now he was communicating. Every instinct told her to walk away, to go home and lock the door. But his sad, tired eyes held her. She thought of his letter. "You saved me." Maybe his story wasn't quite finished yet. Maybe he needed one last thing from her. She folded her umbrella and followed him into the shrine. The grounds were empty, the rain hissing as it hit the stone lanterns and washed over the mossy ground. He led her to a corner of the shrine, to a small, unassuming stone marker she had never noticed before. It was a Munbotok, a memorial stone for the unknown or unconnected dead, those who died without family to tend to their graves. He stood beside the stone, his form wavering in the rain, and looked at her. He seemed to be trying to speak, his mouth moving, but no sound came out. He just pointed at the stone, then at himself. Akari understood. Chiyo had a grave, a name, a story that Akari had uncovered. But Suzuki had nothing. He had simply disappeared, officially recorded as a missing person, his body never found. He had no grave, no memorial, no one in the world to remember his name. He was an unconnected soul, and that was why he couldn't fully fade. He was tethered to the world by the sheer fact of his own unremembered end. He was asking her for a grave, a final resting place for his name. Suzuki Kenji, Akari whispered, the name feeling strange and heavy on her tongue. At the sound of his name spoken aloud, his form flickered violently, and a look of profound, grateful relief washed over his translucent features. He gave her one last, deep nod, not the empty gesture of the stalker, but a bow of genuine respect. And then, he was gone. Not faded, but vanished completely, like a candle flame blown out in an instant. Akari stood alone in the rain, staring at the memorial stone. She was finally, truly, alone. The last ghost was gone. The story was over. The silence he left behind was immense. For months, his presence had been a constant hum beneath the surface of her life. Now, there was only stillness. It was a relief, but it was also a kind of loss. The haunting had defined her for so long that she wasn't sure who she was without it. She went to a nearby flower shop and bought a single white chrysanthemum. She brought it back to the shrine and placed it at the foot of the Munbotok stone. She stood for a long time, her head bowed, not praying, just thinking. She thought about Chiyo's rage, and Suzuki's sorrow, and her own terror, a chain of pain that had stretched over a century. In the days that followed, the world seemed both louder and clearer. The ghosts were gone. She no longer saw transparent figures on train platforms or weeping girls in the park. The veil had closed again. Her strange, painful sensitivity had vanished along with Suzuki. She was normal again. The loneliness remained, but it began to change. It was no longer the loneliness of a person with an impossible secret, but the ordinary loneliness of a young woman living in a big city. It was a problem with a solution. A week later, at the bookstore, Mr. Inoue asked her if she wanted to join him and a few other employees for dinner after work. Before, she would have made an excuse. She would have been too tired, too anxious, her senses too overwhelmed by the constant presence of the unseen. This time, she looked at her manager's kind, normal face. She thought of the quiet emptiness of her apartment. She thought of Suzuki's final, grateful bow. He had been trapped by his own story. She would not be trapped by hers. Yes, Akari said, and for the first time in over a year, she smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'd love to. The dinner was a revelation. It was a loud, cheerful affair at a cramped izakaya, filled with the clatter of plates, the sizzle of food on a grill, and easy, overlapping conversations. Akari found herself laughing at Mr. Inoue's bad jokes and listening with genuine interest as a younger part-timer recounted a story about her cat. For the first time, she was not an observer behind a wall of secrets. She was a participant. The world she had been separated from welcomed her back with open arms. This small step became a catalyst. Akari started saying yes more often. Yes to after-work drinks. Yes to a weekend trip to Hakone with her new friends from the bookstore. Yes to her mother's persistent invitations to come home for a visit. The trip back to Nagano was different this time. The landscape wasn't a source of fear but of a gentle, healing nostalgia. She walked the mountain path behind her parents' house, the one that had once terrified her. She stood in the clearing where she had seen the pile of stones. There was nothing there now but fallen leaves. The woods were just woods again. Her parents were overjoyed to see the change in her. The haunted, hollowed-out look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm and steady light. "You seem happy, Akari," her mother said one afternoon, as they sat on the veranda, shelling edamame. "I am, Mom," Akari replied, and the words were true. Life bloomed in the space that the haunting had left behind. She excelled at the bookstore, her quiet diligence and love of books earning her a promotion to a full-time position. She made friends, real friends, with whom she could share the small joys and frustrations of daily life. The loneliness that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a web of connections that grounded her in the present. She even started dating. A kind, quiet man who worked as a graphic designer and shared her love for old movies. Their first few dates were filled with a nervous excitement that was entirely wonderfully normal. One evening, sitting in a small jazz cafe, he asked her about her past. "You mentioned you used to live in Setagaya," he said. "What made you move to Kichijoji?" Akari felt a momentary flicker of the old tension, the muscle memory of guarding her secret. She looked at his open, curious face. She could give him the edited version, the simple story about a stalker. But she was tired of hiding parts of herself. Her past, as terrifying as it was part of her story. It was the crucible that had forged the person she was now. She took a deep breath. "It's a long story," she began, "and it might sound a little strange." She told him everything. The man on the train, the flowers, the wind chime. She told him about the photograph, the shrine in Aizu, the ghost named Chio. She told him about Suzuki, the curse, and the final, quiet farewell in the rain. She spoke calmly, laying out the facts of her impossible experience without embellishment. She watched his face, expecting to see disbelief, ridicule, or even fear, but he just listened, his expression serious and intent. When she finished, a profound silence settled between them. "Wow," he said finally, his voice soft. "That's a lot to carry on your own." He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me." And that was it. No disbelief, no judgment, just acceptance. In that moment, Akari felt the last of the phantom walls around her heart crumble to dust. The story was no longer a secret that isolated her. It was a testament to her strength that she could share. Years passed. Akari and the graphic designer, Kaito, built a life together. They married in a small ceremony in the gardens of the Meiji Jingu, surrounded by friends and family. They moved into a larger apartment, one filled with their shared collection of books and Kaito's vibrant artwork. Life was full and happy, and ordinary in the most beautiful way. Kari never saw another ghost. Her strange sensitivity had been a temporary side effect, a door that had been forced open and then, mercifully, closed for good. The memories of that time remained, but they lost their sharp edges, softening into something akin to a dark, cautionary folk tale she had once read. One spring afternoon, when she was pregnant with their first child, she was walking through her old neighborhood in Setagaya. She had been visiting a friend nearby and decided, on a whim, to see her old apartment building. It was still there, looking just as tired and unremarkable as ever. On the balcony of her old third-floor apartment, someone had hung a small glass wind chime. It tinkled softly in the breeze, its sound clear and bright. Kari smiled. The sound no longer held any trace of terror. It was just a sound, a pleasant, everyday melody signaling the arrival of spring. The past was truly the past, a story finished, a curse undone, leaving behind only the quiet, resilient peace of a life reclaimed. She turned and walked away, her hand resting on her swelling belly, moving forward into the bright, unwritten future. The peace held for 7 years. It was a solid, tangible thing, built day by day, laugh by laugh. Akari's life with Kaito was a fortress of normality against the memories of the past. Their daughter, Hana, was 6 years old, a bright, curious child with her father's artistic hands and Akari's quiet, watchful eyes. The ghosts were gone, relegated to a locked room in the furthest corner of Akari's mind. One brilliant autumn weekend, they took a family trip to Kamakura. It was Hana's first time seeing the Great Buddha, and she stood before the immense bronze statue in wide-eyed wonder. They spent the day exploring temples, eating sweet potato ice cream, and walking along the beach as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. As they were walking back toward the station, passing by the entrance to a smaller, less frequented shrine nestled in a grove of ancient trees, Hana suddenly let go of Akari's hand. "Hana-chan," Kari called, turning. Her daughter had wandered a few feet away, toward the weathered wooden torii gate. She was standing perfectly still, her head tilted as if listening to someone Akari couldn't see. "Hana, we have to go," Kaito said gently. Hana didn't seem to hear. She took another step toward the shadows under the gate, then stopped. A small, delighted smile spread across her face. She reached out her tiny hand, cupping it as if receiving something. A cold, familiar dread, so deep and dormant Akari had forgotten its texture, began to uncoil in the pit of her stomach. "Hana," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Come here, now." Hana turned, her smile unwavering. She ran back to her parents and triumphantly held up her closed fist. "Look what the man gave me," she said. "What man?" Kaito asked, crouching down to her level. "I didn't see anyone, sweetie." "The quiet man," Hana said matter-of-factly. "He was standing by the fox statue. He looked sad." She opened her hand. In the center of her small palm lay a single, perfectly flat, gray stone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Akari stared at the stone, so innocuous, so mundane, yet so deeply, horrifyingly familiar. It was identical to the stones from the cairn on the mountain path in Nagano. A silent message, a declaration. "I am here." The sounds of the evening, the distant train, the chatter of other tourists, the cry of a seagull, all faded into a deafening roar in Akari's ears. She looked up from her daughter's hand, her gaze sweeping across the shrine entrance, the darkening trees, the faces in the passing crowd. The old hypervigilance crashed back in, every shadow a threat, every stranger a potential phantom. Akari. Kaido's voice cut through the noise. He was looking at her, his expression filled with concern. He had seen the shift, the sudden and absolute shattering of her peace. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." The phrase, once uttered in innocence by others, now landed like a physical blow. Akari looked down at her husband, then at her daughter, whose innocent face was beaming with pride at her newfound treasure. The fortress she had so carefully built had been breached. She had been so focused on the ghosts of the past, she had never considered that the silence they left behind might not have been an ending, but an intermission. She had thought the curse was broken, but now a chilling, new possibility unfurled in her mind. Perhaps a curse so old and deep is not broken, but merely changes its form. Perhaps it doesn't end, but simply waits. She forced her lips into a smile. It was a brittle, fragile thing, a mask she hadn't had to wear in 7 years, but the muscles remembered. She gently took the stone from Hannah's hand, its surface smooth and cold against her skin. "It's a lovely stone, sweetheart," she said, her voice a hollow echo of itself. "Let's go home." She slipped the stone into her pocket, the weight of it a cold premonition. As she took her daughter's hand, she did not look back at the shrine. She didn't need to. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her long, quiet peace was over. The story was not finished. A new chapter had just begun, and this time, she was not the one being haunted. They say every story has an echo, that the sounds and words can attract the attention of something. Can you feel it now? That cold spot on the back of your neck? That's the echo of this story, looking for you. Give this video a like if you felt it, and subscribe if you want to find out what other echoes we can awaken together. Just remember, when you turn off the lights, listen carefully. Sometimes you can hear more than you were meant to. Sleep well.